Okay, so next up we have academic presentations in the theme of children and youth mental health in a changing climate. So this has been something we've been talking a lot about at the summit, opening with our youth panel. And I know we've touched on this in almost every other workshop. So I'm so happy to welcome Terra Léger-Goodes and her team to present on using creative arts and philosophical inquiry to address climate change emotions with elementary school students, a descriptive qualitative design. Thanks very much and welcome.
Thanks, Alexis, and thanks to all the organizers again and everyone who's presented thus far. I'm really looking forward to the next presentations as well. I only have 10 minutes, so I will jump right in. So my name is Terra Léger-Goodes. I'm a PhD candidate at Université de Montréal, Université du Québec à Montréal in Montreal in psychology. I'm supervised by Catherine Herba and Catherine Malbeuf-Urtubis, but I also work with Jonathan Smith, Marc-André Etier, and David Lefrançois. So jumping right in, maybe not that quickly. Haha. So, starting with the concept of eco-anxiety, which actually has been around for quite a while now, but we're still documenting the experiences in adults and children alike. And eco-anxiety can actually be understood as more than just anxiety, where actually many emotions can be involved. So there's fear, and anger and guilt in the face of the socio-environmental crisis. And I like to present eco-anxiety kind of as a spectrum of experiences where these same emotions can be quite adaptive and lead to mobilization, meaningful engagement with the issue on kind of one end of the spectrum, but it can also potentially lead to distress, dysfunction, action paralysis in other cases, and either from one individual to the next, or even within one person as we learn about certain things or if our resources change. So it's quite a complex experience. And it's been found that eco-anxiety or these or climate change emotions can increase as children learn about climate change, either through the media or in school. And this is as early as 8 years old that's been documented. And while these emotions are quite normal as they learn about the impacts of climate change that are truly devastating, it's important to also foster adaptive coping, to give them these tools to remain engaged with the issue rather than becoming disengaged from this kind of emotion overload that it can create over time. And rapidly in the coping literature, there are kind of two forms of coping with climate change that might be more adaptive for children. So there's meaning focused coping, which is really about reframing the problem in a more accessible way. And it acknowledges both kind of these negative, difficult emotions as well as positive ones. It identifies values that may drive us to keep going and create this meaning. And then there's also social support, which is an emotion-focused coping strategy, which is kind of to find a reassurance by maybe adults around the children and feel like our emotions are validated. So this is all great that we've identified this, but there's actually little literature evaluating the effects of potential interventions that could support these types of coping. And with respect to children, the existing literature actually predominantly focuses on climate change education with limited empirical validation of tools that would be available for teachers who teach climate change, but also want to address these climate emotions or eco-anxiety. And elementary school classrooms could actually be perfect spaces to allow children to express their emotions as they're learning about climate change. So based on our previous research, on some pilot studies, on other literature that we've read, there's an important part of our intervention that we built is creative arts, which we use in as a way to engage children in a kind of fun and accessible way to explore and express their emotions. And research also suggests that art can allow children to reframe their experience and create meaning, and this supports coping. And specifically with children, art allows emotional expression using kind of this alternate means of communication other than verbal language, which can be more accessible to them. And so for our specific intervention, we included drawing, photo voice, collage, sculpture making using Play-Doh and Legos. I'll show you some pictures a little later. But based on our previous project and talking with the children, we found that talking about climate change can actually lead to various existential questions, which we consider quite normal, but for which we also need to create space. So philosophical inquiry can create these spaces that allow children to explore their values, to reflect on these common problems, to communicate their ideas, and ultimately to construct meaning. And this is done in a group discussion format where there's no wrong answer. Rather, the children are challenged to think by and for themselves, to ask questions, to think critically. So, for example, in our intervention, 1 week's discussion is all around responsibility in the context of climate change. So, what is responsibility? Who is responsible? Moving on to the methods, we used a descriptive qualitative study with one elementary school classroom. It was a fifth grader class in Quebec, Canada, and this was with children around 10 years old and their teacher. We used observation data during the intervention workshops. We did recordings of the philosophy inquiry discussions. We also did semi-structured individual interviews with the children, post-intervention, and with the teacher. And this was all to document the perceived acceptability, the goals, and effects of the intervention. And we really wanted to stay close to the data and what participants were telling us. So we used a thematic qualitative analysis with both inductive and deductive methods. The intervention lasted 7 weeks with 1 hour workshops per week that always included both the art component and the philosophy discussion component. And for example, one of the weeks, the students were asked to draw the planet in 50 years, which led to the discussion on the theme of hope and despair. Jumping right into the results, the first kind of overarching theme that emerged from the data was around the acceptability of the intervention. And what children told us was that they found it was actually very important to talk about climate change and that they really needed that in the classroom, and especially to listen to children's voices, like this participant told us. So in the blue bubble, the child told us, well, I think the goal is more about getting the voice from the children, because I think we're the ones who are going to live after all of this, not the older people. It's going to be more our generation who are going to have to save the future. So we sensed a kind of frustration that emerged that actually the problem existed and persisted, where some children told us that they wish that actually climate change didn't exist at all and that it was unfair for their generation. So it was kind of this balance between it's really important to talk about it, but at the same time, I wish we didn't have to and that this didn't exist. The teacher for herself identified the goal of the intervention as really starting with what children knew and building from that, which was indeed one of our aims. And overall, the teacher also thought it was very important to talk about the subject of climate change and especially creating space for emotions. Overall, the appreciation of the activities was also very high. The teacher recommended the intervention to other classes. She would want to participate again if it would happen. The students also told us they would participate again, that they enjoyed the activities, they found them cool, fun, they loved it, and felt really comfortable during the workshops, which suggested high acceptability. And an element that emerged was that the teachers thought that more time could be spent on discussing the art, while the students wanted more time for creation, suggesting the importance of understanding both of these needs and balancing these elements, making sure that everyone actually gets what they need. The next overarching theme was around coping with climate change, and children seemed to tell us, well, sometimes I'm okay and sometimes I'm not, and that's okay, which suggested that they were able to identify their emotions, notice that they're there, and they built a certain tolerance maybe to this distress. Many emotions were indeed expressed throughout the different workshops, including anger, fear, hope, despair, sadness, guilt. And some students told us that the intervention made their emotions increase, which was to be expected because some of them actually didn't have that much knowledge about climate change prior to that. Whereas others told us that their emotions actually decreased, like this last quote in the green bubble here. The student told us, well, personally, with my anxiety, it really helped me because it was not easy. But when we went out to see nature, when we talked about it, it reminded me that there are nice things out there. It made me feel good. So overall, the results support a good acceptability of the intervention from both the perspective of the students and the teacher. They both talked about the importance of the intervention, so to create these safe spaces to discuss climate change and the emotions that emerge. And in accordance with recommendations for adults, the intervention was in a group format. It promoted social connection, which is very important. It helped children create meaning around this difficult subject, and they were able to express their emotions. And combining creative arts and philosophy inquiry seemed to help us reach those goals of emotional expression and meaning-focused coping. So first of all, having this diversity of approaches allowed us to reach a diversity of children with different interests, different needs, different communication preferences. For some, it was the Lego that they loved. For others, it was the drawing, and others, the discussions. And the data also suggests that art supported emotional introspection and expression as children shared those emotions with us, which can support meaning making and give them space to voice this. And finally, it seems that they were able to explore their existential questions. And specifically, the theme of despair emerged as being one that students wanted to discuss. We initially had aimed to talk about creating hope and remaining in a kind of positive view, but we realized that there was a need to consider despair as it might be kind of this first step before moving into hope. So the idea is that if an environment is safe, supportive, and nurturing, these overwhelming emotions can be more easily tolerated and integrated. And this initial evidence from the present study suggests that, well, this intervention could create this space. Now, this is a small study with a very specific population, just one classroom. We use non-probabilistic recruitment. There is also possibility for a desirability bias, although we did try to reduce it. And the length of the intervention seemed to be maybe a bit short, but nonetheless, it's easily accessible to teachers and the children, and it was able to reach a lot of children as they learn about climate change. Although the next steps would be to include diverse populations from different cities, rural communities, and use maybe more experimental designs to better understand and document on what variables this intervention could act. So thank you so much for listening. Feel free to send any questions to my email address. I can put it in the chat. And going through quickly the references. I don't know if we have time for questions. I know I went a little bit fast. I had a lot to say in our 10 minutes.
Yes, I believe we have a couple minutes for questions. If there are any questions, thank you so much, Tara. That was a great.
Thank you.
I see in the chat someone's asking if you're able to share your slides or willing to share those later.
Of course. Yes, would there be a way through maybe the Alliance?
Yes, yeah, please feel free to send them to me and I can send. I think based on some of the comments, I think there's interest in several of the slide decks. So I think we'll try to make a little resource compilation at the end of the summit to share with everybody. So yes, people
Perfect.
are commenting on how beautiful your slides are. And
Thank you.
um,
Yes, so for the workshop, not yet. We'd like to keep evaluating it a little bit more before, but ultimately the goal is to have something that's accessible, free, online. We'd like to build something that's easily accessible where we can say, these are the materials, this is how much time you'll need. So stay tuned. We'd really like to be able to share such a template for the workshop.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There's also a question about if you're looking for partners to test approaches in the future or opportunities for that.
Absolutely. Please send me a message, and I would love to discuss potential collaborations, partnerships,
And is there a
or
way
at my email.
to stay involved? Yeah, stay posted on that. Do you have a mailing list or perfect? Okay, yeah, if you're able to share your email, that works. Um, Bob, I think if you want to have a
Yeah.
question, transition to the other presenters at 12:50.
Yes, thanks. Um, Congratulations and thank you. I wonder if you have a sense that because you are young, the thing worked better. We know in medical education that it's near peers that have the biggest influence. And us old guys, people listen politely, but they don't engage in the way that these people always. Do you have a sense of the age of the directors and then the teachers mattering?
Hmm. That's a very good comment and something we could take into consideration. We're currently testing the project with teachers, so asking them to lead the project without us necessarily being involved. Again, so more and more teachers could use it as if it's us going in classes. It's not that viable on the long term, but it was interesting and challenging for me because I do consider myself young. But the kids, how they talk to us, they'll say like, well, like you, an adult, it's kind of your fault. So they do see us as as adults when we go into the schools. But it's a good thing to keep in mind. I'll yeah, try to integrate that into our next questions. Thank you. And I think we're at time, but please don't hesitate to email me if you have questions and or find my LinkedIn if you want to learn about our next project.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tara. That was terrific. And I think, yeah, it sounds like a lot of people would like to connect more, hear more about what you're working on next. So thank you.